Excellent. Well, Rupert, it's been far too long. We had tried to do this before, but parliamentary recess and other life events got in the way. Wanted to start with the prosecution of a chap called Hamit Yoskin yesterday for burning a Quran outside the Turkish embassy. And I wanted to mention this not just because I think it shows how ideologically captured and, I would say, illegitimate our judiciary has become, but because you put forward a very principled motion against blasphemy laws and the insulation of all religions and belief systems, including Islam, from mockery, satire, discussion and criticism. And I think only 4 MPs at the time of writing have signed it. So I wanted to ask 2 questions. What do you think of the state of free speech and free speech law in Britain? And why aren't more MPs like yourself speaking up about this?
Well, it's a very good question, and I did support one of the Tories' motions. So I then suggested he should support our motion, and he declined to do that. So it was, as I said, one-way traffic. They should support our motion because I think the key to a functioning democracy is free speech. It allows people to have frank debate. We should not have any blasphemy laws here. We should not have any differentiation between any of the religions. We should be able to have frank, robust debate. We should be able to poke fun at things that we don't, particularly either agree or disagree with. I mean, I know we had the Charlie Hebdo issue in Paris, which I think was driven by, again, a similar issue to this. And what happened there was inexcusable. So I think, for me, robust debate gets at the truth. Offence is not a reason to avoid free speech, and I think our parliamentary system, whilst it should be based on free speech, arguably it's been undermined by a politically correct approach to life, which means that the truth very rarely sees the light of day, and when it does, it's very refreshing for the British public. So I'm very strong on that, and I know most other libertarians like yourself would agree with it. I mean, most of my early day motions, I frankly can't understand why the whole of Parliament hasn't signed up to them, but they don't. And I think it's a very good question. Some of them say, well, they just don't bother to sign any early day motion. That's their rule. But I think that's a cop-out, frankly.
So you said about political correctness. I think that might be the case for some of the judges. Now, the presiding judge in Koskin's case absurdly used the fact that he was attacked by a chap that was coming out the neighbouring building brandishing a knife, who's now denying the fact that he had a knife, even though he's on camera. And he's not being charged until 2027. So we expedited all those trials for Lucy Connolly and Peter Lynch and Hamit, but not this guy for some reason. And then got kicked in the head by a Deliveroo driver, because, of course, I'm sure he's contributing wonderfully to the GDP. He used that as the justification for prosecuting Hamit, saying, well, clearly there were Muslims in the area that were offended. So I think you're correct that there's quite a lot of judges, local councillors, and the grooming gang issue and the like, who have been ideologically captured by diversity, equity and inclusion and see the job of the state to protect the feelings of minority groups that they think are marginalised. But then I think, and this is an uncomfortable conversation for most politicians to have, I think that there is a virulent strain of Islamic activists that are taking advantage of that liberal sentiment by a lot of people in power and are pushing through blasphemy laws or preferential treatment by the back door. And I think this was evident with the debate you had on Twitter. I think it was Andan Hussein MP, who after you said, we should have no blasphemy laws, even though, Cromwell's your hero, we got rid of that quite a few years ago now when he passed them. And he said, well, you just want to make fun of Muslims, Rupert. And you were like, yeah, you should be allowed to. But it was a real mask-off moment. It was really saying, I think Islam should be entirely protected and get special treatment. So I think it's a bit of a give and take. How much of it is one and how much of it is the other?
Well, in answer to your question, I mean, the judiciary, I think, is not as sound as it used to be. I think we have got a 2-tier judiciary in the same way we've got a two-tier police force, we've got a 2-tier virtually everything. All of it, a lot of it based on, as you say, the poison of DEI, which has been leaked into the blood of Britain over quite a long period of time now. So, I mean, we have got a situation, and it happens throughout history, where lawyers become too important within our society, and I think we've got there now. So arguably they need to be taken down a peg or two. Tony Blair, obviously, and his Supreme Court creation, I think, has played a big part in it. But also the people, as you say, who are now sitting as judges. And for me, the biggest sort of, if you like, red flashing light was when Baroness Hale and her colleagues unanimously decided that proroguing Parliament was illegal. Now, I could have understood it if it was a sort of split decision, but the fact that it was unanimous made me think, well, this is something to start worrying about, and I think we do need to start worrying about it, because I think the sort of the courts have been undermined. I think we've now got lawfare on a scale that is quite dangerous. You've got far too many laws. You've got the ability to subjectively use lawfare where you don't like what somebody's saying or what somebody's doing. And I don't argue. I don't understand why our establishment is so keen to protect Islam. I mean, it's one of many religions, and I don't think any religion should be singled out for any special treatment. If you have a society that believes in free speech and that does poke fun at things and does challenge things and does debate whether something's right or wrong, there should be no exceptions. It should be for every religion, every faith, every politician, every public servant, whoever. They should all be, and they should all face the same challenge from a society which ultimately is seeking the truth. And you don't get at the truth by suppressing free speech. You don't get at the truth by bullying people into silence. I think we've seen that throughout history. So I mean, how do we cure it, Connor? That's the question, because DEI is embedded deeply within the fabric of Britain now, and a lot of malign behaviour stems from there. Hopefully, with Elon Musk and Donald Trump rolling back through Doge all of the misdirected funds coming out of US aid, hopefully that will, if you like, stem some of the lifeblood of this nonsense. And as we know, a lot of this stuff starts in America and it usually dies in America, which hopefully it is doing. But I despair in many ways of, you know, the people in Parliament, the people in the civil service, the people in the judiciary, the people in the police. I don't think the junior police are bad. I think some of the head of the beast is wrong. So, you know, I was at the Dragon School, as was Cressida Dick. So I mean, a lot of the problems for the Met that I lay at her door, a lot of the sort of wokery and the sort of police cars being painted in rainbow colours and all that other nonsense. The police should be there to police. You know, things are right, things are wrong, and it doesn't really matter what political opinion is. If it's wrong, it's wrong, and if it's right, it's right, and the police should be dealing with the law, and they should be ensuring that there are no exceptions to the way in which they treat the law. The law is the law.
The perfect example of this is the Chief Constable of Merseyside Police told the Home Affairs Select Committee in their report denying two-tier policing that she had withheld information about Axel Rudakabana, but on the 31st of July had considered publishing his Christian family background explicitly, in her own words, not to get at the truth, but to protect Muslim communities. So it's not just the frontline officers who are sort of complying with this malicious legislation. It's officers at the top who've been mired in DEI making executive decisions that then cascade down the chain.
Look, that's what we're up against, all of us, and particularly your generation. I mean, it didn't used to happen when I was young. You know, I think we had probably a society that was much more at peace and much more comfortable with itself. We'd fought 2 world wars, and I think the top of the agenda, at the top of the agenda, was individual freedom, individual expression, the right for minorities to pursue what they want to pursue, as long as they're not causing, if you like, discomfort or problems for other members of society. So I think we were a much more tolerant society. And I watch really in horror. I don't understand the genesis of this establishment sort of two-tier approach. And I think a lot of the problems that we're encountering on our, if you like, our rape gang inquiry stem from a fear of the establishment in particular, but other people within public service fearing being branded as a racist. Now, that inquiry should be about right and wrong. It shouldn't be about whether somebody's racist or not racist. So I think if you focus on what's right and what's wrong, all of us are better off if the judiciary, the police, and the organs of the state are completely impartial in the way in which they deal with it. It shouldn't be different. I mean, you shouldn't be treated differently if you're running a white rape gang to if you're running an Islamic or Muslim rape gang. The evil is the perpetration of rape upon underage young girls. They are the part of society that needs to be protected. But as you know, the Muslim bloc vote was a big part of Labour's success. Personally, I, as you probably know, I would change the way in which postal voting operates. I think it needs to be radically overhauled. Most people are fit enough to get to a polling booth, and I believe it is one man or woman, one vote. Obviously, there are exceptions to that. In the forces, maybe somebody's terminally ill or can't get to the polling booth, but the exceptions should be a very small number of people. Other than that, if you want to participate in an election, you should turn up to a polling booth, and there are plenty of them. So that way we get rid of all this block voting distortion. But again, the two-tier policing we saw of the pro-Palestine marches in London, it's just palpably obvious to everybody that that's what's happening. And I think increasingly that's why the British people are becoming frustrated with the way in which we're being governed, and that's why they want change. So it's not as if it's hidden, Connor. I think it's becoming, it sticks out like a sore thumb.
I do have a genesis, I think, if you let me lay out a theory for why it seems incomprehensible that the rise of two-tier policing has happened on the watch of an establishment that calls itself liberal. And I think it's because you and lots of people who thought the Thatcher Revolution was an excellent thing had individual liberty, meritocracy, and therefore a comfort with inequality, because you get the rewards of your hard work, and if you don't work hard, then more fool you. You had those as your North Star. Whereas the likes of Keir Starmer and Lord Hermer and those who purport to enjoy international law have equality as their North Star. They fundamentally believe that deep down, if you take a man from Mogadishu and drop him in Manchester, the only thing separating him is the fact that he hasn't had as much money as you in his life, which you can easily correct, and a little bit of education, which, that's nothing a pride parade and an anti-rape leaflet won't solve. And so actually, if you or I say, well, there's a difference between us and that man from Mogadishu because of his family structure, his faith, his culture, and the civilization that rests like a dead hand on his mind that means that he won't adopt British values overnight, well, then you're committing the sin of racism. You're standing in the way of equality. And so if you notice those differences, you're actually worse than the criminal himself, because if you stop noticing those differences, he wouldn't commit any crime. And I think that's actually why Emily Maitlis, in that interview in the newsagents, was angrier at you for pointing out the cultural differences that might cause the Pakistani Muslim rape gangs than she was at the rape gangs themselves. I think that's why we're talking at complete moral cross purposes.
Well, she, in that interview, she tried to, I thought she hadn't done her homework. I've given a substantial amount of money to that inquiry, and as you know, I don't make any money out of being an MP. I give my salary to charity because I'm not in it for the money.
Commendably so. Has she apologised for that yet?
No, I don't think she will apologise. You find the liberal elite, Connor, apologies come, they're pretty rare.
Yeah, few and far between.
But she was going down a hole, so she thought she'd play the racist card, and I thought, well, I'm not going to let you out. I'm not going to let you out, and I'm not going to react. So I just completely ignored it. So it didn't work. Her ploy didn't work. So going back to your question, I think it's a very interesting question. I mean, I am a great proponent of Charles Darwin. So I love a bit of Darwinianism, and I think the whole essence of the way in which man has progressed is based on the Darwinian theory of survival of the fittest. The problem we've got now is that we live in what I call post-Darwinian world, and I think people like Hermer and Starmer, if you like, are the antithesis of the survival of the fittest. So what they're trying to do is actually weaken the overall structures that have created the kind of advancement that man has achieved over a very long period of time, which has been based on largely, I mean, whether they like it or not, it's been based on a medical Darwinianism, because those people with a weaker constitution previously died. So that there was this thinning out, this natural process. So you ended up with not only people who were arguably probably fitter, stronger, healthier, more energetic, they lived longer. They were the ones who basically procreated more, and you actually got a much more healthy structure within society. Now, that doesn't mean to say, and I think Victorian Britain probably was the best embodiment of this, where you actually had, I think, a society that was based pretty much on Darwinian theory, but it did, because man is not an animal, he can have the safety valves that you need to protect those people who are unfortunate enough not to be able to compete within this raw Darwinian society.
Philanthropy and charity.
Correct. Well, you had the friendly societies, and you had other private sector mechanisms which actually were safety networks. Which again, if the Darwinian theory works and you create the wealth, and a lot of the wealth that we've got today, still we should be thanking the Victorians for. And I think a lot of the welfare state, for instance, is not affordable unless you have a vibrant economy. And this is going to be a big issue for us going down the line, because I don't think we've got a vibrant economy anymore. We've got an economy, and this is where you've got your reverse Darwinism, is quantitative easing. As you know, I had a German debate or a 10-minute rule bill actually on quantitative easing, which is actually still alive. Christopher Chope very kindly keeps it alive. If I'm not in Parliament, he does what's necessary to keep it alive. So it hasn't died yet, and normally 10-minute rule bills die. But QE for me is the total sort of embodiment of reverse Darwinism. So when a country gets itself into trouble, and I saw this when I was young, which throughout the 70s, and then I was in the city from the 80s and the 90s, as you say, with Thatcher. You ended up in the 70s with this theory of systemic risk. So the central planners thought it was right that you had to support bankrupt banks. You had to use your good offices to ensure there wasn't a sort of financial run. Well, that's wrong. The one thing you need in a vibrant capitalist society is you need runs on banks. Britain has never been greater than when we had more runs on banks throughout between 1800 and 1900. Banks went bust to a penny, but if you were stupid enough to have your money in the wrong bank, you lost it. And that was pretty much the way in which it operated, which meant you took a lot of care about where you put your money, which is what should happen. So QE, gradually we've had this greater and greater intervention. I remember in 87 we had what doesn't even look like a blip on the chart now, but in my day it was a huge collapse. Again, the markets were shut for 2 hours. Greenspan was at the Fed. Massive intervention, without a doubt. And it's gone from there. So we've had a system that has distorted reality, and therefore it's misallocated the benefits of capitalism. And the people who are basically closest to the oxygen, which is the money printing, are the ones who've tended to make the most. So whether you're on Wall Street or whether you're a hedge fund manager or whatever, these guys have become insanely rich just simply because they're close to the source of oxygen. And this is where I think a lot of the distortion that's created this DEI and created sort of what I call the reverse Darwinist world, that's where I think the genesis of it is. So what we've got to do, I think, is create a situation where we return to a much more capitalist society. We're all told we live in a capitalist society. We don't. Do you think COVID central planning was capitalism? Of course it wasn't. It was a bunch of half-wits handing out money on a scale that's never been seen, most of which was printed by the Bank of England. I mean, that's not capitalism.
And they failed no...
That's central planning. By the way, they locked down the young and destroyed their lives.
Yeah, I remember that,
But you remember that?
Yeah, it was almost impossible to get a job, and any time that you applied for something out of university, you were told, well, this position isn't open to white men. And of course, these people that ruined the economy, be it politicians or executives at the Bank of England who chased away our mutual friend Liz Truss and seems to be increasingly vindicated as time goes on, they suffer no consequences while we have to pick up the tab.
Well, Liz Truss was badly treated. I mean, and again, I have very little respect for Andrew Bailey at the Bank of England. I think he's a sort of the embodiment of what I would call an establishment stooge. And the truth about Liz Truss, I think, is basically, as you probably know, rates were slashed to zero for a very long period of time. And then the endowment books of a lot of these pension funds began to suffer. So they started writing options effectively on volatility. And then when rates went up in a straight line, that was causing a major problem for the pension funds, because these options they'd written were fine while you take the premium and you keep it, but when you get a big move one way, it's like any insurance. When there's a claim, you've got to pay it. So there was an endemic problem there. And when Liz Truss did what she tried to do, and arguably she didn't broke it to the market in the best way, but I think what she was trying to do was, on the whole, the right thing. They thought, well, we'll wrap this problem round Liz Truss and blame her. But, you know, the genesis of it was, and again, there was Goldman Sachs was involved, a lot of these investment banks, they were all involved in this, and they got away with it because Liz Truss was blamed for, you know, the run on the gilt market. She was basically held up as you've got it wrong, and the establishment sort of, you know, slammed in, got rid of Liz Truss, and then you got the, you know, the safe hand, pairs of hand, establishment hands were inserted, and she was blamed for everything, along with Kwasi Kwarteng. So
they're paying for that scapegoat now, though, because Starmer and Reeves have found themselves in the straitjacket of the civil service. They empower the OBR even more, and then they've gone, oh, Lord.
OBR's just a quango.
Yeah.
I mean, why anyone thinks the OBR's forecasts are lamentably poor, always have been. So why would you pin any hope on what the OBR says? They haven't got a clue. But this is the world we live in. So I'm deeply concerned, Connor, about the economy now. I mean, we hear you know, Rachel Reeves say, oh, well, last month the economy grew by more than we expected. Well, that's largely for very short-term factors such as the weather. But actually, if you look at the structural issues within the UK, I am very worried about the UK. I think the UK economy, and you know, London, when I was young, was a vibrant place where everybody wanted to be. I mean, now, even last night, I wended my way home at about 11 o'clock. The whole place was absolutely dead.
I hate coming here. It's
Dead.
nothing like I was
Dead.
growing up. Like one of the first political moments I remember as a kid, 2011 London riots, because they came up near my road, near the bottom of Elton, where I was living at the time. It was only because the buses got blocked, they didn't burn down the high street. Certain areas around Westminster now, it looks like the riots never stopped.
But what Labour don't understand is you can't pay the public sector more, because actually they're less effective than they were when they were earning a lot less. They just get less and less effective and more highly paid. And I don't know if you've tried to do anything with the public sector, but nobody takes any responsibility. It is the absolute classic sort of embodiment of central planning. If you don't take a decision, you can't get it wrong. Therefore, you've got a job for life and you pick up your pension without any problems. If you make a decision, oh, God forbid it might be the wrong one, and then you get blamed and you get sacked. So what happens? Nobody makes decisions. Nobody answers phone. Everybody wants to work from home. I think we're the country now who's got more people working from home than anywhere else in Europe. So look, I mean, what I think to myself is, why am I going to be taxed more in terms of corporation tax? You know, the national insurance threshold was cut, the rate was put up. That's a huge cost to British business, which started on April the 5th this year. On top of that, and Big Ange Rayner came in with another 5 billion, I think it was, of workers' rights costs. So again, the private sector, which ultimately should be the most important part of our economy, because ultimately from the private sector, and this is where from the Victorian private sector we got huge enterprise, huge wealth, huge exports, and real investment, targeted, you know, productive investment. And by the way, just investing in an arms factory is not going to be the answer to our problems. So they think they're going to drag us out of a problem by making arms. That's not going to last long. But as a private sector investor, why would I now have all these, if you like, drags on my profitability of my businesses, and then be expected to go out and take risk? So I have to identify, and this is the essence of capitalism, you identify a risk that you want to take where the reward's big enough for you to take the risk. But if you get it wrong, you lose your money. That's the downside. So you lubricate the market by entrepreneurs taking risk. It's basically, you know, targeted risk, and they work it out. But now, if you take the risk and you get it wrong, you still have to write the check. If you take the risk and you get it right, guess who takes all your money? You don't get it. The state takes it. So the odds aren't in favour of people taking risks. So when people then don't take risk, you don't get reward. Because in the end, any form of vibrant capitalist economy is based on risk-taking, and for that risk you expect reward. And the people actually who employ, you know, they say, oh, well, we're in favour of the workers. Well, yeah, maybe the case, but the workers have to work for somebody, and somebody has to administer, collect all the taxes, gift wrap it, give it to the state.
And be able to.
So it's all very well to vilify the people who actually take the risk and employ people and have to fill in countless forms and do battle with countless ineffective government departments and, you know, VAT inspectors and God knows what else they've ladled onto us. The flip side of the coin is, what do they deliver for us, Connor? The answer is a very ineffective, wasteful, a sort of operation of an over-complex state.
Ideologically captured, faceless bureaucracy.
Correct.
I do feel that, and we had this conversation before, I think when we first met, that all of the conversations about unleashing entrepreneurialism and economic dynamism, I find them good when you have a population that wants to work. And it feels like a lot of the time, not for you, but for many politicians, the unspoken elephant in the room, the albatross around the economy's neck that weighs like an anchor, is immigration. And you've put forward a motion that says we should commit in principle to, and exploring the policies of, the mass deportation of every single illegal immigrant in Britain. I know you worked with Rob Bates at Centre for Migration Control and calculated it might cost us 40 billion, but it will save us at least 10 billion every year. I think an underestimate. I find that courageous, but curious, because we are derided as a very online right many times, just because it seems that you get a lot of traction on Twitter. And it seems that we are ahead of the curve on a lot of these measures. Now, Keir Starmer is racing forward and adopting your...
Even he's talking about too much immigration.
He's saying...
Whoever thought that would happen?
If you don't speak English, don't come here. I remember you saying that on the BBC.
That's what we say.
I also now remember that your former party...
I think I had an argument with Ash Sarkar, didn't I, on
you
TV
did.
From memory.
Your iconic moment
Even though Reform said I've got early onset dementia, I think that was where I...
Yeah, that was... not very good. As far as your former party as well, Reform UK, I remember Nigel Farage saying to Stephen Edgington, mass deportations are a political impossibility. And then I went to Reform Conference where you also spoke, and I said mass deportations is the one thing they should do, and all of their members applauded. Adam Wren's polling said that they expect Reform to do it, and hey presto, a week before the local elections, they promise a minister for deportations and policies on how to conduct this, which we haven't received yet. So
we're still waiting for quite a lot of things that were promised.
Yeah. Well, actually, there's a quick detour. I remember Nigel Farage telling Winston Marshall that Parliament had basically been silenced on Axel Rudolph, and there was a sort of secret that he was in possession of that would cause a massive scandal. Do you know what that was?
No.
So
no. I heard him say that, but I don't know what it was. But so yeah, on immigration, I'm very clear. So this goes back to what we had talked about earlier, the law. If somebody comes here illegally, they're breaking the law. They should be detained and deported. And I put forward my plan for a tented camp. I don't think we should be welcoming them unduly with new mobile phones, luxury accommodation, Deliveroo jobs, going to the top of the dental lists, which by the way most people, taxpayers, don't get now. Going to the top of all the medical treatment lists, basically being treated as if they've contributed to our economy. No. They've come here illegally, they've broken the law, they should be deported. Those people who are living here illegally equally should be identified and deported because they're living here illegally. And illegal means illegal. And by the way, we've been looking into this. I think I'm right in saying that, you know, anyone who aids and abets somebody breaking the law is arguably breaking the law themselves. So I think there's a bit more research to be done on this one, but that's a route that we are certainly looking at.
We could explore mandatory reporting, for
so
example.
We should, well, exactly. And another of my bugbears, if you like, is the foreign criminals in our prisons, of which there are about 10,500. Why? Why are they in our prisons? Why haven't we deported them? We've got overcrowded prisons. We're releasing dangerous criminals early, as well as locking Lucy Connolly and her ilk up for ill-advised social media posts. So we've slightly lost the plot, Connor. And I think, you know, I just spoke what I saw as the truth. And I think the British public have not heard that coming out of Parliament for quite a long time, because I think the party structures have distorted the truth. You've got too many career politicians who don't have any life experience, who are busy clambering up the ladders, hoping not to slip down the snake, and therefore they don't tend to challenge the status quo. And as an independent MP, I've quite enjoyed. You know, within Reform, I was pretty free to do within reason exactly what I wanted, other than Nigel did try and edit one of my speeches and take out when I was talking about mass deportation. And I've never talked about mass repatriation, which is what he's tried to badge me with. No, I've always talked, let's start with the illegal stuff before we start to concentrate on things that are far more difficult. But he asked me to take the word mass out. I did actually take the word mass out, so I talked about basically deportations, not mass deportations. He also asked me to take out my strongly held view that those members of the families who, you know, on the rape gang situation, if they knew that somebody within their family was perpetrating these vile crimes and they didn't say anything, again, it's their job, in my view, to report it. And if they didn't, then they should be deported.
Why did he ask you to take that out?
I don't know. I didn't take that out. I refused to take that out. I said, it's my speech. No, I'll just to mollify you, I'll take out the word mass, which I did. This is on the speech in North Essex, funny enough, in Kemi's constituency. So
it was very good. I remember clipping and sharing it at the time.
Yeah, well, so I mean, Essex Man, the cat of a Lawneye, they seemed to like it, but you know, I don't know why Nigel was so intent on toning that down. I think, you know, in a sovereign nation which voted to take back its own sovereignty in 2016, which, by the way, we haven't had, why would somebody be concerned about deporting people who come here illegally, who are living here illegally, and those criminals in our prisons who have done something criminal? I just can't see anyone can impugn that logic, which is why I don't understand why the entire House of Commons hasn't signed my early day motion.
So about 13.
I don't get it, but
so
you know,
far.
I think, have we had 13 now? I think we've had who've signed that.
Mainly
one.
Conservatives, a couple of DUP people, if I remember correctly. But I'm.
Well, Jim Alice has signed it, yeah. So
yes.
we got a few, but look, why wouldn't the whole of Parliament sign that?
Well, the guys I said to in Reform, who, you know, this will be, just me talking to you, I'm sure will be taken as an attack, but I'm not hostile to some people still over there. There's still good people in the party, as you yourself have said, even if the leadership has made some serious faux pas. I said to them, guys, you shouldn't be afraid of this just because the BBC, ITV and everyone who wants to see you fail will always call you racist, because your own voters expect it. And the majority of the country support this because it's just enforcing the law.
It's common sense.
Presto.
It's common sense.
As soon as the polling comes out, they sort of race up to catch with the online right. They surf the wave, as Gawain Towler once said. So before I move on to sort of final question on the lay of the political land, how do we actually do it? Like what policy mechanisms are we looking at? What laws do we have to repeal? What size of operation would we have to conduct in order to, let's focus on the illegals, remove that at least 1.2 million illegal immigrants currently residing in Britain?
Well, look, I think the first thing I've got to do now, Connor, obviously, is find a way of creating some form of political movement or party which is going to give the British people an opportunity to vote for something that's going to change the way they're governed. by 2029. I seriously think, from where I sit and what I've learned in the last year, I've nearly been in Parliament a year. Can you believe it? I mean, I think it's shot by. I can't quite believe it, but it's a year. But having been politically or attempted to be politically assassinated by my colleagues within Reform, I'm now an independent. I'm still busy. I've been busy, as you know, in Parliament, trying to change that Overton window and start to speak the truth, which I think is not common in Parliament. I don't think there are many MPs who speak the truth as they see it.
For which you have our gratitude.
But what I've got to try and do, in order to finish off the reason I got involved in this at quite an advanced age, is I've got to try and find a solution with my team. And by the way, I'm surrounded by some great people. You know, I've got a great team around me, so I'm eternally grateful for that. It's not just me. I've got the support that helps us to collectively be effective, which is the way it should be. So we've got to find a solution that I think gives the British people an opportunity to show, and this is the electorate, what I call real England, really, and real Britain, because you know, that to me, the Act of Union, very important. As you probably know, I'm in favour of reversing Tony Blair's vile devolution, which I think was designed to break up the proudest sovereign nation in Europe, which it was quite effective at doing at the time. And, you know, quite frankly, the money that gets wasted through the Barnett formula in the Scottish Parliament is shocking, and you know, in Wales, in the Senedd, same. And I don't really see why the honest tax-paying people in Middle England should be funding all this nonsense. So we really need one Parliament, and we need to be governed as, if you like, the Act of Union envisaged, as one country, which is what we are, legally. So all of this sideshow needs to be changed, but I think we've got to find a way of appealing to the bedrock within the country, because I actually think if I can't achieve that by 2029, or a group of us can't achieve it by 2029, I think Britain's going to be almost beyond redemption. I can see there are so many malign forces that have undermined our institutions, that have undermined our Parliament, that have basically undermined our, if you like, reputation as being logical, decent, common sense, fair-minded people. And that, if you like, was a prerequisite in a way of forcing us to join this post-war, centrally planned socialist project, which the European Union was and is. And it's been, you know, it hasn't been easy to reverse that process. Every time they have a setback, they regroup and keep coming again. So they don't accept no for an answer. They're pretty determined to achieve what they want to achieve. So I've got to appeal to those people who want their country back. The only way they're going to get their country back is to elect somebody, I think, from outside the existing political establishment, which is what myself and my ex-Reform colleagues were. And winning the election is only half the equation. It's all very well to win it, and this goes to your question. When the British people, if they were to see the game and realise that they've got to vote for something new, they've got to vote for people who are going to not only win the election, but also then deliver the reforms that are necessary. And looking at what's necessary, you asked me a question just now. It's difficult to answer it straight away, but I think it has to start with repeal. So I sit in Parliament and I watch what happens, and I try and follow the agenda, which, by the way, is much more difficult than you would think, Connor, because the whole agenda is designed to ensure that the government is able to do things without scrutiny, which is what Parliament's supposed to be doing, is scrutinising it, all the legislation, and ensuring that it's in the interests of the British people. But, you know, judging by the way in which voting takes place, half the time most MPs don't know what they're voting for or against. They get very confused and have to be guided by their whips. And I guess that, again, the best example of that is going back to the Maastricht Treaty, which I fought hard against, where I actually asked all the MPs, MEPs, members of the House of Lords, you know, the media, have you read the Maastricht Treaty? Well, I had, in the end, several Conservative politicians who voted for the Maastricht Treaty who admitted to me they didn't read it. So this is where you've got a situation that I think the Great Repeal Act has to be the start of it. And it has to repeal, we've got to look at all of the malign acts that I think distort human relationship sort of internally, because I don't want the state dictating how people interface. I want people to find their own level. I want them to interface freely, openly, honestly, but with each other, not through the state. So I think all of this legislation that's distorted common sense, logic and fairness, I mean, you probably have to start with the Race Relations Act. You probably have to then go on to most of the stuff that Tony Blair, Brown, Campbell, Mandelson passed, obviously the Human Rights Act. We've got to sort out the Supreme Court, as we talked about. You've got to sort out the Equalities Act, the Bribery Act, and some of this stuff came from the Tories.
It came from Thatcher, 1986 Public Order Act that lots of people get charged under.
Exactly. So I think all this stuff needs to be reviewed and repealed. And there's far too much legislation. There are far too many laws. There's far too much. I think it was Tacitus said, the more laws, the more corrupt society. Well, I mean, that's true, because if there are so many laws, you can always find a law that somebody's broken, and you can then hold them up as a sort of lawbreaker.
For my friends, everything, my enemy's the law.
That's right, exactly.
Yes.
So, well, if you're in the club, nobody bothers with it, but if you're outside the club, there's always a law to prosecute you on. Mm. And again, I think this comes back to, we've been looking into it, private prosecutions. I think there is an argument now that maybe people do have to start looking at whether they should be taking out private prosecutions if the police do things that are incorrect, or if stuff isn't legally labelled correctly or whatever. So I think there's loads of things we need to look at.
Well, you've had to do a private inquiry, of course.
The overriding issue for us all that we've got to solve collectively by 2029, we have to win this next general election on a first-past-the-post basis, and we have to then be ruthless about how we repeal and then pass legislation which is going to empower the individual and drive the economy and take statism out of our lives. You can't totally remove statism because the state does have a role, but it has to be a responsible state that's not a self-serving state, that isn't, if you like, overmanned by petty bureaucrats who are effectively feathering their own nests at the expense of the taxpayer. And that's what's been happening, I'm afraid. And the more I sit in Parliament, the more I'm convinced that's what we've got.
Final, very short question. I'm not going to do the boring one that everyone asks you. Are you going to join the Tories? Are you going to defect to the Lib Dems, etc.? You said Oliver Cromwell's your political hero.
Yes, I love Oliver Cromwell. I collect Oliver Cromwell coins and books, and I've got pictures, and I have a portrait of him in my office to remind me of the great man every time I look up from my desk. He did some things that, as a free-thinking sort of Anglo-Saxon, I wouldn't agree with. So some of the things he did to crush people having fun and dancing and Christmas, and some of the stuff I don't agree with. But do you know what? At the time, Britain was a pretty rotten place. Parliament had gone rotten. He fought the Civil War to try and most of it was over the Common Prayer Book, as you probably know. So I think he was a very high-minded, very fair man. As you know, during his time, we had a lot of Jewish immigrants coming here because he was very fair to lots of minorities. He fought the Anglo-Dutch wars. He was, I think, a truly brilliant general. Never lost a battle. But really, what he wanted to do was what I enjoy most, was to go back to the country and be in his constituency, growing vegetables, farming, and doing what I call real things. And that's how I remain sane, Connor. I go back at the weekend now, at the age of 67, and I like growing my vegetables. We post a few pictures of that, and topping my fields, which I was doing last weekend, walking my crops, which aren't looking great this year, by the way, because we haven't had enough rain, particularly in the Cotswolds, where we need rain every day. But that's real life. That's what I think keeps your feet on the ground. And if you get involved in quantitative easing, printing money, it's pretty easy to get high on your own supply after a bit. But let me tell you, Mother Nature reduces you to the humility that you need in order to, I think, live an honest life.
Perhaps you're closer to Cincinnatus then, the farmer who puts down his plough, takes
Well,
up
that's
the
what
office of state in return.
Boris always liked to quote Cincinnatus, didn't he?
Yeah.
Cincinnatus and his plough.
Yeah, well, perhaps he should have lived more by Cincinnatus' principles. I'm more a Guy Fawkes man myself, but Rupert, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure.